Good evening. I'd like to call to order the Planning and Development Committee meeting for November 8th, 2023. Niagara Region and Grimsby are situated on treaty land. This land is steeped in the rich history of the First Nations, such as the Hattaway-Wendoronk, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. There are many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people from across Turtle Island that live and work in Niagara today. The regional municipality of Niagara and the town of Grimsby stand with all Indigenous peoples, past and present, in promoting the wise stewardship of the lands on which we live. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary or non-pecuniary interest? Seeing none, just need a mover and seconder for approval of the agenda. Moved by Moved by Councillor Bradzi, second by Member Drew. Moved by Councillor Bradzi, second by Member Drew. Resolve the agenda for the November 8th, 2023 Planning and Development Committee meeting be approved. All in favor? And that's carried. Can I get a mover and seconder to receive the previous minutes of October 18th? Moved by Councillor Freg, second by Member Drew. Moved by Councillor Freg, second by Member Drew. Resolve the minutes from the October 18th, 2023 Planning and Development Committee be received. All in favor? That's carried. All right, now we move to the public meeting. It's non-statutory. Tonight we have staff from the Planning Department that will start us off with some opening remarks. Lauren, please come up to the podium. Welcome.
Through you, Chair. Oh, sorry.
Just the applicants are stuck in traffic, and they were doing the main presentation. Our presentation is very short, so I was wondering if it would be prudent to wait until they arrive. They indicated 10 minutes or so from now. It's up to you, Chair.
Yeah, I'm quite happy to wait so that they hear your presentation as well, so that works.
Yeah. So if we could just wait and then we could start.
Yeah, I'll call a recess, say to 7:15.
Or 5:15.
Or sorry, 5:15. I'm used to 7 o'clock meetings. Just calling the meeting back to order. As I said, tonight we have staff from the Planning Department that will start us off with some opening remarks. Lauren, please come to the podium.
Good evening, everyone. Katie, I think that there's the PowerPoint. Through the chair. My name is Lauren, and I'm a planner with the town of Grimsby. Tonight, we will have representatives of Castle Point Numa present a revised submission of the 19 Elm and 13 Mountain site. I'll begin by providing a brief review of the process that has occurred at this site so far, and then allow the representatives to provide a presentation that will give a more detailed review of the proposal's revisions to you all. Then there will be a period for questions and comments to be made to council and town staff. Next slide, please. So on May 31st, 2021, the town of Grimsby received official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment applications for 19 Elm and 13 Mountain from Castle Point Numa. An open house was held on September 13th, 2021, and a public meeting was held on December 16th, 2021. Both were held through Zoom. On March 21st, 2022, Town Council refused the official plan amendment and bylaw amendment for the application from Castle Point Numa. Castle Point Numa appealed the refusal to the Ontario Land Tribunal and is awaiting a hearing date. Castle Point Numa has since acquired lands at 21 Elm Street and provided a revised proposal to the town. Next slide, please. So here we can see the previous proposal and in yellow, if you just click next, Katie, and the newly acquired lands at 21 Elm Street, again, identified in yellow. And on the next slide, we can see the footprint for the revised proposal, which extends into the newly acquired lands. The purpose for tonight's meeting, next slide, will be to collect public input regarding the proposal for council's consideration. I will now invite Drew Sinclair, lead architect, to present the team and the revised proposal. Thank you.
Mayor Jordan, members of the committee, honorable councillors. Now, is there a way to bring up the presentation? Now, while we're bringing up the presentation, I want to begin by apologizing for arriving late and forcing a delay in the beginning of this. There's real weather out there. I think this is probably the first time any of us have seen snow this year, so a little bit out of our control, a little harrowing coming in, but we made it, barely. Actually, it was the absence of a washroom between here and Toronto that was the biggest issue, but sorry to begin with a little levity. Do I have control from here? Okay, I will. So to begin, I also would like to admit there are members of our team who are still in transit, so I'll speak to a few of the slides that our client or the owners of the site, Castle Point Numa, would have spoken to. I think many of you or most of you have met Castle Point Numa, many of you through Harley Valentine, who's a native of Grimsby and the lead investor in the project. Castle Point, if you could go to the next slide. Castle Point Numa is a values-based development company that places community building, sustainability, and design excellence in all of their projects. One of their focal points historically, and this includes a number of projects where we are SVN architects and planners working very closely with Castle Point, involved an innovative approach to heritage conservation, trying to find an active way to both conserve the heritage resources of our towns and cities while also creating context within which badly needed new housing and investment in public realm can be made. A few of the projects, just to, whether they intended to speak to them or not, I think it's probably useful context for everyone attending to know some of the projects they were pivotal to include the renovation and restoration of a building that's called the Tower Automotive Building in the lower left-hand side, where Castle Point Numa led not only the reinvestment and redevelopment of the building, but also creating a new home for the Museum of Canadian Contemporary Art in an old industrial area in Toronto. It's one of the things that they, I think, take greatest pride in, is finding opportunities where there's assets of tremendous, as I mentioned, cultural heritage value, that through the resources that can be made available through development, they find a new life or a new purpose. A number of the other projects we're currently involved in, or Castle Point is currently leading, including a number of mid-rise and townhouse developments, both in towns like Grimsby, but also Collingwood, Thornbury, the City of Toronto, town of Blue Mountains. The next slide. The team, and I should have introduced myself. I know I was introduced. Thank you very much. My name is Drew Sinclair. With my colleague Aaron Budd, we're the lead architects for this project. We are also the landscape architects for this project, and I'll speak to those together today. The approach to both the public realm and the landscape of this project was an important starting point for us. Our team is complemented by our lead planner, Emma West of Bousfields Inc., ERA, who have been working with us since the very beginning on developing an active strategy for conserving both the historic Baptist Church or Wolverton Hall on the site, but also trying to determine an active program for the former house, Wolverton House, on the site that's since it was last a home, has held a variety of uses on the site. BA Group, and I apologize, Stephanie from BA Group isn't here in the room tonight, but BA Group is our transportation consultant, and BA Group has played an active role not only in providing the analytics that have informed the submissions that have been made to date, but also in advising on design and trying to resolve not just an adequate, but an exceptional approach to how we're accommodating parking, traffic, and servicing on the site. Next. So, as was already shared, the most and the fundamental difference between the site that we're speaking about today relative to the site that we spoke about back in 2021 and 2022 is the addition of 21 Elm Street. So while it's a minor addition to the site, what it's allowed us to do is to create both efficiencies, but create some real value along Elm Street, some additional retail, some additional active frontage, but also, and maybe importantly, a much improved approach to parking on the site, both parking access, overall provision of parking. It allowed us to create a slimmer building on the whole, and those of you that would have seen the earlier proposal, and I'm not sure I have a lot of images in this presentation, but the building had what I would call a C-shape or a T-shape plan, where from certain angles, because of the T, it actually appeared deeper than it was. So we've removed those elements and actually reduced the plan to just a single eye, and that was made possible by the addition of 21 Elm. Next. Now, all of you are familiar with Grimsby. I think one of the reasons this is of such important or interest certainly to Harley, but us as part of the design team, as both architects and landscape architects, is both the opportunity, and what's already happening along Main Street. The zoning for this site, and I'll speak to that in a moment, allows this site to act in a way as an accompaniment to the ongoing development of one of the most walkable main streets anywhere in Southern Ontario. It's an amazing historic fabric. It's an extraordinary scale along Main, and I think as the transition happens towards the south and as you move towards the escarpment, the zoning and the official plan changes that have happened over the last decade have really allowed for creation of housing downtown. The quantity of housing that actually allows us to re-engage and reanimate the historic Main Street in a way that I think sets the table for a really exciting future. We understand concerns about parking and concerns about site access and concerns about the change that will come with this. But I'd say the starting point, and this was what was brought to us when we were engaged on this project by Harley years ago, was to do something close to downtown that allowed for keeping the arts, keeping vital retail, keeping jobs in the center by allowing people an opportunity to walk to work close to the center, to avoid using their automobiles, and to create a kind of place that in a lot of ways has been lacking from the core. So we're trying to do that in three ways, really. Provide new housing, rental housing. What you're reviewing tonight is a proposal for new rental housing. A full 35% of those units will be family-size units, 2-bedroom or larger. There's a proposal here to create some extraordinary new public realm. That's the third approach, and that's a series of publicly accessible spaces surrounding the site, including a very large four-quarter plaza to the building that helps us in celebrating the two heritage buildings on site. And then I think maybe most importantly, we've created an opportunity to keep those two buildings to keep Wolverton Hall and to keep Wolverton House, two extremely important buildings or two heritage resources for the town that can be reanimated in full through this proposal. Next. So the heritage strategy, as I think most of you have heard in earlier presentations, involves the retention of the primary heritage building. The Wolverton House is an 1840s built home. It's one of the oldest houses still fully serviced within the town of Grimsby. The house has gone through a series of renovations and additions, most notably in the mid-20th century, and you can see that rendered on site when you look at the era of brick in its use. The original brick on the house is locally derived, and you can see all the brick in the house is locally derived, but you can see the transition in tone through the later eras of brick, the last edition, I believe, in the 1960s. So the proposal is to again retain the historic house itself, the 1840s house. Similar with Wolverton Hall, the approach is to remove a series of 1914 additions at the rear, which are the slightly complex elevated. If you've been in the Wolverton Hall, you might be aware there's a kind of elevated stage area at the eastern end or the north end where some of the service spaces and kitchen spaces are. So the proposal is to remove the rear portion of the hall, retain the 1860s original church, and actually reintroduce the functional spaces that provide service to that hall actually in the new building itself. So it'll still maintain all its usefulness over the goodness of time. Furthermore, I think the strategy is underpinned by a desire to keep the new building back, to hold it back almost a full 14 meters from the face of the historic buildings behind the extent of the historic footprints completely, so that the buildings are read in their full 360 degrees, the historic buildings. Next. So I've mentioned this already, the zoning and the official plan designation. The official plan designation, as I'm sure all of you know, is a downtown core development with the zoning, again, further supporting intensification downtown development, which has historically, or in the word of the policy, permitted 4 stories, but may permit 6 stories with endorsement of council under certain conditions. The proposal tonight that is under review is 7. And I'll explain some of the efforts that have been made to minimize the impact of the additional story. And I suppose it's important to note, while we're still on the slide, maybe before I get into the details, one of the outcomes of the earlier council discussion and one of the outcomes of the conversation we had as a community was approaches to building in a heritage context, where there's 2 heritage buildings and an effort to maintain them in situ, not to pick up and move, not to deconstruct and rebuild, but to retain them as heritage buildings on the site, has the effect of actually reducing the amount of area, which is a costly effort on its own to keep those buildings in situ. It has the effect of reducing the amount of site available to development by about a full third. So in order to accommodate a sufficient amount of density to make a feasible development and actually deliver new rental housing, we're left with only a small portion of the site to both build new, but also to provide parking. So the addition of 21 Elm, you could imagine, I know not everyone here had a chance to review the plans from the 2021 submission, but the 2021 submission with an L-shaped plan, you could imagine the complexity of building the below ground structure that would accommodate that parking. All parking is below ground, just to be clear. With 21 Elm, we have a neat rectangular footprint and the ability to go down an additional story, a full 3 stories below ground to accommodate the required parking here. Next. So this is the view you will see. This is looking from the west, looking across Mountain Street. You can see the forecourt that I described earlier, the space caught within that 4 meters, caught between Wolverton Hall. Caught sounds a little bit negative. The space created by the retention of those 2 buildings, and adding as a backdrop the new building, the rental infill that we're talking about today. The parking and loading entrance it will remain in a similar position to where you enter the parking on the site today, just to the north of Wolverton House. And the drive aisle is contiguous across the northern end of the property. But this gives you a sense of the overall massing, and there's a number of efforts being made in the design of the building to continue to move and respond to the context. So Elm Street, of course, has a different character than Main, or different character than Mountain. And as I mentioned earlier, I think there's a desire in the way this building is being laid on the site to transition from what is in essence a neighborhood, especially to the south side of Elm and further south, or to the further to the west along Elm by bringing the building down as it moves towards Elm and then introducing a fairly significant step above the 4th floor so that all the height above the 4th floor is held significantly back from Elm. I'll show you that in a moment. But similarly, in a similar way, I mentioned holding the whole building back 14 meters, introducing a series of steps, and you can see them. You can see the shadows that it creates in this facade to give the appearance of the whole building moving back gradually from the street, so the impact of that additional height is minimized. Next. Here's I think the only view we have close up of what that space between the two buildings might be like. Some of the conversation the last time we all spoke together was about the exposure to Mountain, the fact that there are still a lot of heavy vehicles that use Mountain Street, and the effect of that active transport, not active transportation, of that movement along Elm, the noises associated with might affect the quality of the space. So a lot of the efforts that have been spent in the redesign are to imagine the landscape as a series of buffers, a series of landscape elements at the edge of the street that allow for clear lines, sight lines, and visibility, but also to create a sense that you're in an outdoor room that really defined by Wolverton Hall and Wolverton House, these two red brick elements with the kind of buff champagne background of the new building. Next. And then an idea for what that new space within Wolverton Hall might be like. I think many of you have probably been in the space or attended events there, co-hosted by our clients or the Grimsby Benevolent Society. There's an intent to maintain it as an active use space, potentially available for community programming. And as I mentioned, the coupling of the historic hall with the new development gives us lots of opportunities to create something really, really quite extraordinary in that space. Next. And then a view looking to the northeast from Elm, from the southeast corner of Elm and Mountain. And so this gives you a sense of how the two buildings come together. It's hard to see in this view, but they don't quite touch. They're connected at the ground floor, but there's some breathing room between the buildings just to assure the reading of the historic hall maintains intact. But this, and I apologize, we don't have a before and after view, but if any of you could recall the image that we would have shown in 2021 or 2022 of this condition, the Elm Street frontage was a fairly narrow, really the single lot width. There was a single storefront at its base. It was really an extension of the Wolverton Hall space into the rear. So we've now created an opportunity for 3 distinct retail spaces on Elm Street, fronting Elm, and then a separation distance as you move towards the properties towards the LCBO to the east, and then a publicly accessible accessway that will actually maintain pedestrian access all the way through to the Balsam Lane parking at the rear. Next. And then rotating around so you can see in a single image the Mountain Street and the Elm Street perspectives. Give you a sense of how that, the kind of proudness of historic Wolverton Hall on the corner is maintained. And maybe this image shows better than all how the compound, the quality that's created by introducing a new park space. If you can imagine the south side of the church today, where there's a kind of fence and enclosure and lightly maintained landscape, the idea that we're creating really an extended plaza along the south side of this building, along Elm. That plaza is wrapping around Wolverton Hall, and we're creating that courtyard-like, room-like space between the two historic buildings. This image also clearly shows the terracing or the stepping back from Elm that I mentioned earlier. Next. So landscape, and we won't have time to get into this in great detail today, but a large part of our focus has been making sure that these are not just accessible spaces, they're also great spaces, and they're all great public spaces. There are outdoor areas on the site that will remain amenity for the people living in the building. There's a series of outdoor landscape spaces in the upper portion of the building that would be amenity spaces for the residents. There is a space along the eastern edge of the building adjacent to the public walkway that will be available for community gardens for residents living within the building. But the courtyard space, the central plaza or the outdoor room, is a publicly accessible space. Number 5 is the linear plaza that I mentioned that really is an extension of that retail out to the street. The 5 in the upper right is the forecourt to the lobby. So the lobbies are set back, tucked away from the street to assure that the prominence is given to the heritage buildings, but also to the retail. Next. And just a very, very simple landscape plan. What you would have seen in 2021 was a bit more detailed. I think what we're working on now is a buffering strategy to assure protection, both from noise and exposure for those outdoor spaces, and accessibility to make sure the grades are all accessible for ease of movement. Next. So overall project statistics, the site area has increased, as you can see. So just shy of 1 acre in overall size, 3,397 square meters. So for those of you that think in acres, so acres, an acre is something in the area of 4,000 square meters. So just shy of an acre on the overall site. The residential GFA of 10,637 square meters, so roughly 120,000 square feet. There are 120 units being proposed. So 10% of those, 12 of those units will be 3-bedroom units of around 1,200 square feet. Aaron, you're going to have to confirm, well, it's the 2-bedroom units, which vary in size from 700 square feet up to about 1,000 square feet. 25% of the overall units are 2-bedroom units, so 35% of the units generally considered family size. The overall bicycle parking spaces, which I'm sure is a concern for some, but 90 bicycle parking spaces on site, mostly interior to the building, just to assure safety, but there will also be exterior bicycle parking, both for use of the retail, but also residents, and then vehicle parking spaces. So we're proposing 155 spaces in the development for 120 units at present. Now, it's important to note there is a requirement for both commercial parking, a component of commercial parking on this site, but also visitor parking. So what we are proposing is 1 parking space dedicated for every residential unit, 120 parking spaces for 120 units. And then there's the additional 35 spaces are being used in a time of use arrangement where during the daytime, and they're separated fully, as you move into the parking garage, there's actually a space created for commercial parking that will provide internal to the building 32 parking spaces. And that would provide time of use parking. So daytime, the majority use would be for commercial. So that's a significant change from the first proposal, is there's a significant quantum of new commercial parking, time of use shared parking being provided within the building. And then additionally, that parking transitions over and becomes visitor parking during the nighttime hours or portions of the weekend. So the way this additional parking is being achieved is really through the addition of that extra below ground level. I believe 2.5 levels in an irregular configuration in the original proposal. With the addition of 21 Elm, we've been able to create a much more regular lot, and going down a full 3 levels, we're actually able to achieve the full complement of 155 spaces. Next. So we have a series of appendices which are very high level, and I've described them already, but this is really just to show the public access across the site, that there is public circulation around the entire perimeter of the block, and we're maintaining along the northern edge and along the eastern edge public access to the Balsam Street parking as it exists today, improved, obviously with lighting to keep it safe. Next. And then from a vehicle circulation point of view, full turning movements in and out of the Mountain Street entrance at the north end of the site, as I described earlier, very similar to where the full turning movement entrances, exits are today, via the current curb cut on the north side of the Wolverton House. Next.
You don't give a fuck.
Thank you. So. I'm done. I just want to point out that my colleagues from Castle Point Numa have made it. It was not great tonight, yeah. Is there anything you want to add, since you would have heard most of the presentation? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for your presentation. Need a mover and seconder to receive. Moved by Councillor Freg, second by Member Drew. Moved by Councillor Freg, second by Member Drew. Resolved that the presentation from Castle Point Numa be received. All in favor? That's carried. Now we move to the public consultation section of the agenda. We're happy to see a number of residents here tonight to voice their opinions on the development of 13 Mountain Street and 19 Elm. Your feedback matters and will support the project team with their work. I would like to remind everyone to state their name and address before making their comments. First up, we have Carlos Zanin. Welcome, Carlo. Come on up to the podium. Good evening.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Carlos Zanin. First time at a meeting. I've never decided to come to any of these things. But anyways, I sent a submission for consideration, but I made a couple of notes here, so I think I'll start with my notes first, if you don't mind, and go from here. So Carlos Zanin, I'm the owner of 21 Elm Street. Still am the owner of 21 Elm Street. Hopefully, if this project is approved, then there's a history on what I'd like to see. But I believe in the importance of keeping the downtown businesses viable. With the threats of large corporate box stores closing in on Grimsby, this becomes more and more difficult. A residential base, be it rentals, condos, townhouses in the heart of the downtown area, will make this happen. A strong community based within walking distance of the core will ensure healthy economy and jobs for Grimsby. That was just my note that I took right now. So I'm just going to read what I sent, and then I will be done. So Carlos Zanin, again, the owner of the Zanin Denture and Anti-Snoring Clinic. Been there for 43 years, practicing now for 43 years. The clinic's located, the clinic was created by renovating the first floor of a former house to accommodate a modest reception with 3 treatment rooms. Downstairs, the basement was converted into a supporting laboratory, dental laboratory, and storage space. The location, downtown Grimsby, is ideal for my business. We have built a robust clientele serving Grimsby's aging population. Continuing to grow our business, downtown Grimsby has been a focus for my family. My son Nicholas, he's now a denturist, and he's joined my practice in 2014. I have another son that's a dentist. He's operating in St. Catharines, and my wife is a dental hygienist, so we're all in the dental field in that. So hopefully, with this in mind, succession of the operations, my practice will go to my son. It's the hopes that he will continue to serve this community for the next 43 years. However, the building that I'm in right now, 21 Elm Street, has its constraints, including accessibility, and that are not equipped for the next generation or chapter. Castle Point Newman's acquisition of the neighborhood property and subsequent renovations was a welcome addition to the neighborhood. It has been a pleasure seeing the rejuvenation of 13 Mountain and 19 Elm Street, and the launch of the GBF Wellness Hub provided a complementary use to my business. The opportunity to participate in the proposed development was obvious to my family. The results of owning 2 proposed built retail spaces equipped with accessibility and turnkey for our business provides a clear path to the next chapter. My support for the Wilmington, both as a residential and business owner, reflects my family's vision for the downtown Grimsby. That includes much needed housing, strong retail spaces, and the opportunity to build businesses for the next generation. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. Up next, we have Kevin Luchenhusen. Welcome, Kevin.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. My name is Kevin Luchenhusen. I'm the owner of Harmony Jewelers, along with 2 other businesses in downtown Grimsby, and I also own 3 substantial properties right in the center, in the core of downtown Grimsby, those being Harmony Jewelers building, the Old Home Hardware building, as well as the Teddy's restaurant property. Can everybody hear me okay? Great. Having been a part of the downtown community since the 70s, my family opened Harmony Jewelers in 1975. I feel I have a strong understanding of the area's dynamics. I want to begin by making it clear that my intentions are not to impede the progress or development of Grimsby. In actuality, I recognize the pressing need for housing in Grimsby, especially affordable housing, and I'll support any initiative that will help address this. I also see the benefits of a vibrant, bustling downtown community. I strongly believe intensification in our downtown area is essential for its survival. However, my concerns revolve around ensuring developments like the Wolverton and all those that will follow can meet our community's housing needs while also agreeing to do what they can do to avoid negative impacts on the surrounding businesses and residents. I approached tonight's meeting hoping for a better understanding of the revised proposal of the Wolverton, but the information provided to date has been very limited. Tonight, already a few of my answers or questions have been answered, but there's still several others that I'm concerned about. So I'll do my best to articulate my concerns with the details that I've been given to this point. I'm deeply concerned about the proposed parking deficiencies in the Wolverton development because it could severely impact our downtown community. The invitation I received to this event tonight, this invitation that was advertised in the newspaper to the public, contained information that was very confusing and needs clarification, particularly concerning parking. The invitation mentioned that 128 parking spaces were proposed in the original 73-unit design, but the actual proposal only included 101 parking spaces. 128 spaces was what was mandated by the town's official plan. A little bit confusing when you read that invitation. Secondly, the invitation incorrectly stated that the buildings of up to 6 stories are currently permitted. According to the town's official plan, the new buildings that are actually restricted to a maximum height of 4 stories, 15 meters, with exceptional cases allowing consideration of up to 6 stories. And that's subject to impact assessments to avoid significant negative impacts on the surrounding area. The revised proposal not only increases the project's footprint by 36%, but also adds 65% more residential units, along with a few thousand square feet of additional commercial space. If you guys want to correct me if I'm wrong here, please do so. Like I said, the information that we received was very vague. We were looking for some updates to that information before tonight's meeting. With this expansion, the deficiencies have worsened dramatically when it comes to parking. I'm not sure what those numbers are, but it has to be a dramatic increase in deficiencies from the official plan that the town of Grimsby has. Town of Grimsby just put forth a parking study, and phase 1 of the parking study was just released a couple of weeks ago. In that study, it confirms what business owners downtown have been saying. Parking requirements for residential land uses should not change at this time. Existing parking requirements are aligned with other jurisdictions. Data indicates that the existing parking minimums, which are 1.5 spaces for residential combined with visitor, it's 1.5 spaces per unit, offer a balance between providing sufficient parking and efficient use of land. And finally, the study suggests that the town should ensure that their role in providing residential parking is limited because providing municipal parking is expensive. This can be accomplished by ensuring residential developments meet the parking regulations. While there are other concerns, my focus as a business owner in the downtown core centers on the parking issues because it directly threatens our local businesses and the vibrancy of downtown. Inadequate parking will deter customers, affecting economic vibrancy of our downtown community. I want to urge town staff, councilors, and stakeholders involved to consider the long-term impacts of the Wolverton's parking deficiencies. I'm also confident that we could find a solution that can address our housing needs, but also sees the importance of sustaining the prosperity of our business community. I'm confident that there are solutions. We just need to come together to work them out. I've actually worked with an architect to see if a parking garage in the heart of Grimsby would be feasible. He came back with a great design that could provide ample shared parking for a variety of developments that require additional parking to make their developments feasible, both residential and new businesses. With careful design, it could blend seamlessly into our environment, preserving our escarpment views. Even now, it could serve a few developments in town. Currently, we have vacant lots and empty buildings on Main Street and Ontario Street. From conversations, I contribute these vacancies to the challenges property owners face due to a lack of adequate parking. For example, the vacant lots on the corner of Elm and Main Street. They remain undeveloped because previous attempts to design buildings on those spaces with residential units were not financially feasible due to the lack of parking. Even in my own experiences, I've explored other possibilities of acquiring other buildings in Grimsby with the hopes of creating more spaces for exciting new businesses downtown. But the insufficient parking infrastructure deterred me from pursuing those opportunities. We have to put our heads together to come up with some real and sustainable solutions that address these problems, instead of creating one solution at the expense of the entire community. In closing, I would like to ask town staff for some clarity. I've got 3 questions. If you could answer them afterwards, that would be great, or follow up. Can you provide the exact parking ratio that this new development is proposing? And also, what is required currently under the rules right now? What is the actual deficiency of parking spaces? I know there's several thousand feet of commercial that has been added to the development. I see in the renderings that they're proposing a grocery store and a cafe. The denturist clinic is going in there. All of these developments would be fantastic for downtown Grimsby, as long as it doesn't cost the businesses that are down there now. And I think open access to the Balsam Lane parking lot is a very big concern of mine. I'm wondering how staff can support this development with such a significant parking deficiency, especially given the recent parking study recommendations to ensure new developments in these areas meet the current ratios. And thirdly, could you clarify whether the substantial changes in the Wolverton development proposal, such as an increase from 73 residential units to 120 residential units, an increase in 65%, and then the significant increase in the footprint of approximately 35%, How can this be treated as the same application, or should it be treated as an entirely new proposal? I have a lot of other things, but I think I've this run about 10 minutes here, so I've got to close things out. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. I look forward to positive conversations that can stem from our dialogue tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Up next, we have Tony Josie. Good evening, Tony.
Thank you, Your Worship. Tony Josie, 19 Hunter Road. Born, raised, never left Grimsby, and at one time, brings back memories, I was on council in the 80s and 90s. I was a past president of the Grimsby Chamber of Commerce. I was involved with the north side parking proposal that Kevin's father and I spent countless hours getting that completed. So I'm well aware of parking and the constant questions. But reminiscing, I happened to be at the council table some 40 years ago when we had the last rental build in this town. And I don't know if you watch the same news that I watch. We have a housing crisis, not only in Grimsby, the province, and the country. And I look at it as a three-way partnership: the federal government, the province, and the local municipalities in the region. What has Grimsby done to help with housing? And it's a problem. I got kids that had to move out of town. I got friends and relatives that want to stay in town and then want to sell their home. I want to thank Castle Numa. You know, I made a pledge when I left council. I wasn't going to write letters and I wasn't going to stand in front of council, except for hospitals, hospices, and things like healthcare. But I felt so strongly about this proposal. I attended the Zoom meeting, and I felt it important enough. First of all, thanks, Castle Numa, for the faith and investment that you've already made in this town. When I sat at this table, we were always worried about retaining our historical content. You've done that with your proposal, okay? And by the way, Harley, welcome back to Grimsby, an old Grimsby boy, and glad to see the faith and investment. Parking has always been an issue, okay? And I did a little research, and I don't have the time that some do, but just so you know, in the theme of building housing and partnershiping with all levels of government and creating the atmosphere and environment so that we can have some housing built, so that we can retain some of the Grimsby people, you need to adapt and you need to adjust, okay? So way back when I was on council, you know, it's 1.5 spots for rental units. Okay, well, the last rental unit we built was on Robinson Street, Ross Robbins, okay? And if I remember, and I'm getting old, Walter, but it was 54 units on Robinson Street and 34 parking spots. And in my 12 years on council, I never had a parking complaint. And I drove by there 3 or 4 times in the last month, and guess what? There's parking still available in the building. Because the fact is, people downsize when they go to rental units. They don't come with 2 cars, okay? Grimsby's 1.5 spot is outdated, okay? Hamilton is on a blended average of 0.6. Niagara-on-the-Lake is 1 spot per thing, because I have some people say, well, you can't compare with Burlington's 1 spot, Brampton's half a spot, Mississauga's 1 spot. Well, those are all big. So I looked at Niagara-on-the-Lake. And by the way, St. Catharines has no rules. Come on down and build. Don't worry about parking. We want your building, okay? Niagara-on-the-Lake, and I would think that their downtown core, and by the way, the numbers that I quoted is for downtown Burlington, downtown Hamilton, downtown Niagara-on-the-Lake is 1 spot per unit. We need to adapt our rules here in town and go down to 1 spot. So happy to see the additional units, really pleased with the additional parking, and I commend and I hope that we can get things going. We need to get things going, not only in town, but in the province. And it's interesting because I heard that we talked about the, I got a hold of the memorandum, October 20th, Strategic Parking Management Study, which is kind of like the phase 1 for the town of Grimsby. Okay? Some Burnside guy wrote it up. Interesting comments on page 8 out of 9. In addition, imposing an increased parking requirement on developers may cause increases in housing pricing, which goes against overall objectives of providing affordable housing. Right in the town document, October 20th. Apartment buildings, multi-dwelling units, have smaller requirements. When you scan the area for land use, ranging from 1 parking spot to 1.5, obviously they didn't scan far enough, but data collection was undertaken for 2 multi-dwelling units in Grimsby by the Lake, and I would have thought that we're so deficient in parking. If you go down there, my wife happens to like a couple of the stores down there, so we go down there every once in a while. But in the evening, they went around, and that was to provide 1.25 parking spots per unit. On average, it was 0.72 parking spots were being used when the town study took place. Did you hear that? 0.72 parking spots for the 2 rental unit buildings down there? Okay, interesting. And yes, I saw the last part. Interesting, they talk about the old parking in lieu, and if the town were to even consider that, sorry about the gray hair, but when we did the deal with the Gables, we made him pay for parking. So my question is, if a property has already paid for parking, and they change ownership, do they have to pay again? Something I would ask. Okay, so overall, I support the Wolverton because I know, and we all know, Grimsby needs purpose-built rental housing. In fact, both governments finally woke up and took the HST and the PST off of the properties. We got to get it going. And we haven't had anything like this in 40 years. What an opportunity. You know, it's almost like having the lottery jackpot delivered to your house without buying the ticket. So wake up and smell the roses and enjoy. I also support Wolverton location because it's zoned for it. And someone talked about zoning. You know, and Don, you can correct me if I'm wrong. We have 2 pockets downtown. The Village Inn Square and Harley's property has the largest height zoning within the entire municipality. And I'm sorry, that might have been done in the 80s and 90s, but I'm glad it's there because when Don and I and Debbie Zimmerman and Nick, we walked up and down to town in the 80s and 90s, and we were worried about our downtown. And we said, if we have residential growth within the downtown core, our businesses will survive and the town will survive. Remember that, okay? I don't think it's changed, even though it's maybe been 40 years ago we dreamt it, but we haven't had it. And, you know, DeSantis's development, I welcome the Century condos and the Wolverton, and I really believe this could be the stimulus of a big and brighter future for downtown. Thanks again, Harley. Welcome back to town. Council and committee members, please consider. You might have some old rules in the old bylaw book, and you talk about bylaws, you know, and I read through that parking study, and a lot of it brought back a lot of memories, and I got to tell you, you know, the old rule. We have a bylaw down there. There's a limit of parking. But once you start enforcing it, you're going to have some business. Oh, there's some people that we had real estate agents. I went down there with Kevin's dad, and we used to watch, and we used to actually, we marked the tires. And some of those people were there for 5-6 hours. And we're talking in the 80s and 90s, and never moved. So we made a bylaw to have a limit of so many hours parking. And then once every 10 years, the town wakes up and starts enforcing it, and holy hell breaks loose. Everybody calls the town and wants their tickets canceled. We'll be the first one to complain about parking. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Tony. Up next, we have on Zoom, James Jolly. James, are you there? No, apparently he's left. Up next, Faye Hassan. Faye?
Faye is on. She's here, but ask her to unmute.
Yeah. Faye, could you unmute? You appear to be muted. Can you hear us, Faye? Can you let us know? All right, well, if Faye would like to speak later, I'll ask if anyone in the audience tonight would like to come up and speak. I welcome you to come to the podium, state your name and address, and we'll add you to the record.
Just for clarity.
It's not allowed procedurally, I'm not doing it.
It's okay. So under our procedural rules, any visiting counselors are supposed to submit their questions in writing to the chair. That's the way the procedure was written.
Can I?
All right, go ahead, Katie.
Through you, Chair, yeah, and also this, on Monday, there's a special council meeting, and that you'll have more opportunities to ask questions for clarification on that.
The reason why, and I'm not.
Oh, yeah, I'll defer to staff on that, planning staff. Walter?
Thank you. I think there were a couple of questions, technical questions. One was parking, and the other one was procedure with regard to the expansion of the application area beyond what the original proposal was, and whether or not it needs to be a new application. Did I get that right? Okay. So the first question with regard to parking, you're right about the notice. That was a typo. It actually is 102 that was originally proposed, and the requirement was 128. So there was a deficiency of 26. The current proposal is the requirement for the current proposal is 199, and 155 are proposed with the submission that we received. To 155, yes. So that's a difference of 44 spaces.
That includes the additional commercial space?
That includes, that's a calculation based on the requirement for commercial spaces, based on one space per 28 square meters of gross floor area, and 1.5 spaces per residential unit.
Can I ask another question on that? Is it okay? Actually,
Sure.
Tony brought this up, that a couple parking spots have been paid for cash in lieu, and the developer is actually claiming ownership to 2 parking spots in Balsam Lane. I talked to the planning department directly, and they said that was not true. That was, those 2 parking spots that were paid cash in lieu were credited to the business that needed them in the building at the time, and that business is no longer there. So that agreement goes with the win with the business.
Okay.
In the
That was-
original submission, 2 parking spots in Balsam Lane parking spot. I just want to
Specifically, yeah, I don't think there was a claim to ownership. I think it was a request for a deduction for the 2 spaces that were originally credited to the property. Anyway, that was my understanding. And with regard to procedure, it's my understanding that the Ontario Land Tribunal has the ability to consider revisions to an original proposal, but it's within their purview to determine whether or not it's appropriate. But that's a submission that's going to be considered by the Ontario Land Tribunal.
I would wonder if you could just come to the podium, please. Thank you.
So the, it's a bit misleading, the difference, the delta in GFA that you referenced, in that the original proposal actually used a series of exclusions, GFA exclusions, including amenities, bicycle parking space, and residential circulation. The current application includes all those spaces, so the actual, call it gross construction area, has increased only marginally relative to the actual site. So when we look at those two, it's actually a fairly kind of normal scaled change in overall gross construction area, but the way it's being calculated between the 2 applications is different. And I think staff have made that assessment through their review as well, because I can't recall, if you used the original method of calculating gross floor area from the 2021 application, the overall increase is, I'm looking at Aaron because I'm sure it's on the top of his head, but it's actually quite a small number. With regard to the overall number of units, while we've maintained the 3-bedroom units, the increase in units was really by removing, we had 2-level units across the extent of a single floor, that's actually being subdivided. So the second floor of those units is actually creating additional units, and the 3-bedroom units are created in the depth of the floor plate. So it created an opportunity to have additional 1-bedroom units primarily, but we've actually moved the larger units and distributed throughout the building. And so I think from a community building point of view, as opposed to having all units of one size at grade, they're now units of varying sizes spread throughout the entire building, and that's where the additional unit count comes from. But I just thought I'd provide those points of clarification. Thank you, Mayor Jordan.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Walter. Do you have any other questions that you feel you need to answer right now?
I'm sorry, Chair, I didn't quite hear your question.
Well, I just wondered if there were any other questions that you need to answer right now.
I didn't hear any other questions.
All right.
I apologize if I missed it. But. Could you come to so everybody can hear you, including people listening online? Thanks.
Sorry, a big part of the question was town staff gave their approval on the original submission. Does that still stand with this, with all the revisions that have been done with the increase in size? All the original reports and consultant information has all changed now. The shadow studies, the traffic studies, the vibration and noise studies, all of those original studies are now irrelevant with the building being so much bigger and so much more density in the building. Does the town staff simply rubber stamp this and move forward, or what does that look like?
Staff will be doing a comprehensive analysis of the revised proposal, and we will be submitting a recommendation to council next Monday, I believe, at the special council meeting. But officially, this is what you're seeing here is a revised proposal being brought to council for consideration. We're not the approval authority anymore. It's the Ontario Land Tribunal. So we have 2 opposing parties. We have the applicant and we have the town. And we will, this particular proposal is a settlement offer, essentially. So it's being presented to the town. The town has to decide, do you want to accept this offer and agree to it, or are we still going to oppose each other at the Ontario Land Tribunal? So, but we will be, and studies have been submitted. dealing with the changes to the plans that are being proposed. Shadow study, revised view shed study, transportation impact analysis, parking, all those things have been resubmitted, and we will be doing an analysis, a fulsome analysis, with the assistance of the various departments and agencies that we've been consulting. And we will be submitting a recommendation to council in closed session, because it is essentially a negotiation.
All right, and just to clarify, Councillor DeFlavio, the agenda will be published for the special council meeting Friday. So that'll have all the information you need on it.
Sorry, if I might add, if Councillor DeFlavio, if he has any questions regarding the proposal, if he wants to discuss the proposal with us, we can do that. And I would urge you to do it as soon as you can, and then we can incorporate any questions or concern you have into our staff recommendation report.
All right, any questions of clarification from planning? Councillor Frake?
Thank you, Mayor Jordan. I think this is a great project. I think it's absolutely wonderful that we have an opportunity, and we have a company that have come to town and has offered us something that we haven't seen in 40 years.
Councillor Frake, the planning committee is just questions of clarification,
all right.
Not opinions.
So I can't make comments?
No, not at this time. Just questions of clarification. Councillor Bradzi?
Thank you, Mayor. Through you. My question is around emergency services. Have they been factored into the new design? I know on the renderings we saw tonight, one thing that was not depicted is the hydro lines that are currently surrounding the property. Now that there will be a high-rise scenario here, that's a whole different ballgame in terms of rescue, in a rescue scenario for our fire trucks. Those aerial lines will impact the angle at which boom trucks could assess residents. I personally would love to see a lot of these hydro lines and hydro assets all over town go underground, to be honest with you. But that's my main concern here. And I'm not allowed to kind of speculate my opinion, but being a millennial, I'm quite aware of the housing crisis. But my biggest concern is this previous proposal was 27 parking spaces deficient. Now we're at 44. So although the project makes a tremendous amount of more sense with the newly acquired property, we are now with a bigger deficiency. So I think we need to look at ways to rectify that, as well as the emergencies response team.
Councillor Bradzi, I'm going to have to stop you now because you're starting to make comments. So. Member Drew.
Thank you very much for your proposal and your information through the chair. You referred to landscaping plans. You reviewed that in part of your presentation. Is there also a plan included in that related to a green roof to take advantage of every square foot that we might have from an environmental standpoint?
I just want to remind everybody that currently the applications that are being considered are official plan amendment and zoning amendment applications. If the application does get approved by the Ontario Land Tribunal, there will be a third application that will be required, which is a site plan application, which will address details like conformity with any fighting requirements. Our fire department staff will be involved in any reviews, as well as green roofs and environmental considerations. Those will be considered later.
Thank you for clarifying that.
All right, can I get a mover and seconder to receive the delegations? Moved by Councillor Frake, second by Member Drew. Moved by Councillor Frake, second by Member Drew. Resolved that the delegations heard this evening be received. All in favor? That's carried. All right, the non-statutory public meeting for 13 Mountain and 19 Elm is now over. We will now move on to the rest of the agenda for the committee meeting. There are no consent reports, no discussion reports. Now we need a mover and seconder to receive the correspondence from the Township of West Lincoln and from the Ontario Land Tribunal for 37 Bartlett. Mover and seconder. Moved by Councillor Bradsey, second by Member Drew. Moved by Councillor Bradsey, second by Member Drew. Resolved that the correspondence from the Township of West Lincoln and the Ontario Land Tribunal be received. All in favor? That's carried. All right, is there any other business pertaining to the committee? Seeing none, the next Planning and Development Committee meeting is scheduled for November 22nd, 2023 at 5 p.m. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Meeting is adjourned. Good night.